Welcome to Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler. On today's podcast is my dear friend, Gail Shurtleff. Welcome, Gail, to the podcast.
Oh, hello.
We're glad you're here, Gail. Tell us where you live.
I live in Hausen, the Netherlands. And the Hausen means houses.
And so isn't it wonderful technology that you're all listening to a podcast? I'm in Salt Lake City, Gail's in the Netherlands, and we've come together to talk about how to help people that are working through depression and suicide. I became aware of Gail in the last couple of years, and we became Facebook friends, and I realized that Gail has great expertise from two perspectives, well, maybe multiple perspectives. Gail's an active member of the church. She has great clinical expertise and has spent decades counseling people with a special focus on depression and suicide. And as I've spoken with Gail, she's helped me to understand this issue and how to minister to people. One of the additional aspects of Gail's expertise that we may talk about is her husband, John, who did die by suicide. And Gail has great clinical training and did everything she could, but sometimes things happen that are beyond our control. And so Gail brings all these different perspectives, her clinical expertise, her teachings and learnings as an active Mormon, and well as walking this road with losing her partner to suicide. So welcome to the show, Gail.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
And as I said before, I'm grateful for the things you've taught me, and the umbrella idea is ministering here, and ministering in other areas that are more complicated is something that you can help all of our listeners do. So I'd just like to start with a little bit of questions for you, Gail, to get right into sharing your expertise to our listeners.
Okay.
Tell us what it feels like for someone to be depressed.
Oh, wow. Um, it's different for different people. Um, for some people, they just feel kind of blah inside. No motivation. They can't concentrate. They can't eat. They can't sleep. They don't feel like they can get up and walk and move and exercise. They don't have purpose in their lives. They don't feel like they do. They feel like they failed. And that's kind of a mild to somewhat moderate. When you get to severe depression, it might feel like you're stuck in bed, you can't get out, you can't logic your way out of the process. Um, the things that gave you pleasure in the past, you can't use them to shake off the depression. Um, it might feel like one of the descriptions that I've heard is that it feels like you're stuck on the bottom of the ocean with a big chest, treasure chest on top of you, and you can't breathe, you can't move, and you can't get this thing off of you, and it's very dark and gloomy, and I quit. I can't fight it. I don't know what to do. So there's a range of feelings that can happen.
That visual is very powerful, Gail. I mean, under the water, chest on your chest, and not being able to breathe. That's pretty powerful to illustrate that. And I want to back up just a little bit. Tell us about your clinical expertise. Let our listeners know your clinical training and maybe some
Oh,
of that.
wow. Well, I did 3 years of graduate school for a master's degree, and it was in clinical psychology, um, which is what I was trained in, but I was licensed as a marriage and family therapist. And that had more to do with California politics than anything else.
Uh-huh.
So my training is very clinical. While I do have some education with couples and families, my main emphasis is on the individual. I've done work with individuals and children, and I was licensed in, oh gosh, when? Well, I graduated in 1994 and did my post grad, and I think my actual license came in 2000 or 2001 after I'd completed the hours and the exams. And in explaining that, I also need to explain that I moved from the U.S. to first Germany and then the Netherlands, and so I was having to fly back to the States to take the examinations during that time. So it took some time to get it all done,
And
and
that's
I
helpful for our listeners to understand just that you've been in this space for a couple decades or
yeah,
more.
I've been in this space a couple of decades, and I love it.
And I am
Um,
new to this space, and I think a lot of our listeners are new, and recognizing that this is a serious topic that needs thoughtful people with clinical expertise to give us perspective so we can better help people. So thank you for walking down this road, Gail, and getting this wonderful education and then having all these therapy sessions. Do you have any idea how many therapy sessions you've had in your career? I've asked that to a few therapists and they most don't know. They've never been asked that
no,
question. Do you have any idea?
I have no idea.
Well, I bet it's
None.
hundreds and hundreds and maybe thousands. So thank you
I
for helping us to understand, what it feels like to be depressed. And so let's shift now to suicide. What are some of the reasons people consider suicide?
Oh, wow. I would say that is as individual as the person. Um, Ultimately, I would say they really consider it due to not being connected with anyone. If there's a connection or if they can feel the connection, and now we're talking about being depressed and suicidal, but not being able to feel like you're connected to humankind, that's going to push the person into the state of or place where they don't see any reason not to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're in that position, you know, telling the person, but I love you, stay around. I mean, we'd miss you. But if the person who is depressed doesn't feel connection, that is ultimately what's going to do it for them in most cases or many cases. I couldn't say one way or another. I have to admit, other than my husband, who was my husband and not my client, I've only had one other client commit suicide, and that was after she was my client.
Mm-hmm.
And I can guarantee you there was a definite lack of connection with her family, society involved in that. And it that's what makes the difference is connection.
I really agree with that. I'm also thinking of I don't know if there's categories of suicide as you're talking. It seems like there's a category of suicide that seems to be very spontaneous and very impulsive and very maybe not as strongly linked to depression or even people that seem connected that have an experience. And this seems to be for our younger people that become more impulsive. Any thoughts on that category of suicide?
Oh my. Um, I know somebody that is very, very bipolar, and her quote on that is that it only takes 3 seconds to go to suicide. And it has to do with low impulse control. And this is not something that just happens. This is a lifelong pattern where a person has not learned to control their impulses in a healthy manner. And so something bad happens, and instantly they go from good, bad, I've got to kill myself, and that's what they're going to try and do.
And if you were the
And
parent of somebody like that, what advice would you have for a parent that feels a family member is in that sort of space?
let's clarify that a little more. In that sort of space that they could be that impulsive and commit the act or attempt the act.
Yeah.
Is that what we're talking about here?
Yes.
Get professional help. That's my best advice. Get them to somebody who is competent to treat impulse control. Specifically, the person might struggle with anxiety or depression or other issues, but what I usually focus on is the anxiety and the depression, which can both lead to suicidality. Um, the best thing I can say is get professional help. Find somebody that understands this. Not all therapists are qualified to deal with this in a solid manner. They don't necessarily have a full understanding of what they need to do. While they might work with some of the issues, they might not work with all of them. So it's also about being a very savvy therapy consumer and interviewing your therapist, taking the time to ask the therapist you want to hire, what do you really know about this and what work have you done? And those answers are important to listen for, and questions are important to ask, such as how much work have you done in this field? Um, what do you really know?
I really
So,
like that, Gail. I think um, we do have this trust of health and mental and physical doctors and therapists, but I think your point is valid that within that skill, we need to make sure they have the specific expertise that we need. And you know more about suicide than I do by far. I'm trying to learn a lot, but it seems like there are different categories. There's this long-term depression. There's that. Then there's this other type where you're not connected to society or family or people, and those two probably overlap. And there's this third one that seems to be a little more impulsive. I see that more in our younger people that aren't sort of thinking what would happen next and next if I did this. And I'm sure I'm oversimplifying that, but I think it's important to sort of understand where people get to the same point and more of the backstory of why they got there and the circumstances around the situation to then, to your point, find a therapist that is qualified to deal with the specific challenges that that person has. Any more thoughts on that?
yeah, as a matter of fact, yes. Um, when we're talking adolescents and young adults, for starters, let's take into account that the brain isn't fully developed until you're about 25. And when you don't have a fully developed brain, remember back to when you had a child that was 3 and they impulsively ran out into the street? There are a lot of theories as to why a young child might do that. But part of it is impulse. They want to go, so they go. And, when I was a little girl, My parents, when I did that once and never again, gave me a good swat on the behind that was a good enough swat so it hurt, made me cry, and then they could reason with me and say, that's a really bad thing. You can't do that. And this is why you'll get hurt. And I did get hurt. I got a swat on my behind, and I learned, well, as a child develops and grows up, they need to have mental swats on the behind as to how to learn, how to grow up, how to develop better impulse control. It's all part of good parenting. A parent that is really checked in is going to guide the child through the developmental milestones and help them to negotiate each phase of life. And so hopefully by the time they're 25, 26, 30, they have enough, not perfect, but good enough skills so that they can make the proper decisions and they can control their impulses. They can sit down and logically say, okay, what's going on here? What do I really need to think through? What do I really need to do? An example of this would be a kid that sits down, a teenager that sits down, let's say it's an LGBTQ person, and they realize, and they're LDS, and they realize as they go through this process that, wow, I'm going to be this way the rest of my life. How am I going to handle it? And those that work through it healthfully can come to understand through personal exploration and finding others that they can speak with who are in a position to really walk them through the process of self-discovery. They can find out that, yes, they actually do have some options. Which options do I want to choose? How am I going to cope with this? And they might not be the options that someone else to choose, but they are the right options for themselves. And it's when a child does not see those options, what they see is, I'm going to be celibate for the next 70 years of my life. That's a horrifying feeling. That's a horrifying thought. And that can spiral somebody down into depression, and they might come to feel like they're losing their connection with their family, their church, society as a whole, and therefore contemplating and acting on suicide becomes more of an option, even though it might not be the best option.
Yeah,
it's a final option.
That's very helpful. I really appreciate you talking about LGBTQ and walking us down the road of how some of our LGBTQ members feel. And I like this idea of they have options outside of suicide, a path that they can choose. You know this better than me, but I like this principle of self-determination, that everybody gets to decide for themselves the right path for them. And we honor those choices and support those choices. Any more thoughts on that?
Oh my gosh. You know what's coming to my mind is my cousin. He came out when he was around, 18 or 19. And before he fully came to terms with being gay himself, he made 4 suicide attempts. Um, and when he finally really dealt with it, this was back in the 80s. So we're talking several decades ago here.
Mm-hmm.
He wound up being excommunicated. And when my cousin and I were talking with him, he said, you know, I'd come to church, but the church doesn't want me. And every time I think of this, my heart just goes into my stomach. So, not that I'm answering the question you just asked, and maybe you want to go back to it, but it really is about realizing what the options are. He is now happily married. He has been ever since legalized, for lack of a better word, ever since gay marriage was possible in California. He and his husband ran out and did it as fast as they could.
Mm-hmm.
But he's married, he's happy, and for him, living has turned out to be a really good thing. But he left the church because of it. Well, he was excommunicated, so he didn't have a choice. But that was the path he followed. And while some people would say, oh, that's really sad, you know, I'm really glad he's alive. I'm really glad he's happy. I'm really glad that he's got a great husband whom he loves. And I'm glad he's not 6 feet under. It would have been a lousy end. But
Yeah.
he was also older when he did this, and his brain was functioning enough by the 4th attempt to where he could realize that I've got to deal with this in a different way, and I'm going to pay a price for it.
That's a beautiful and painful story. I love this idea that part of good therapy and part of good ministering to people that are in a really tough spot is to show other options besides suicide,
Oh, yeah.
and help walk them down those road and make those other options um, brighter and more hopeful, and a feeling that they can go down that road. One of the things you taught me earlier in one of our visits was this idea that for some people there is no light at the end of the tunnel. That's certainly a phrase I've used to bring hope into people, is there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and sort of hang on. But for some people there is no light, and so that analogy may not be helpful. Talk more about that, Gail.
Well, you know, that literally, for someone I know, was a process. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, and this person would have to take the bus from up in Marin County into San Francisco. And in order to get into San Francisco, you drive through the Waldo Tunnel. And it's a very interesting tunnel in that it kind of, you go in and it's dark, you can't see the other end. And then the tunnel starts to kind of flirt with the mind. And you see light, and then you see light, and then you don't. And then you see light, and you can see that you're going to get out of the tunnel. And some people can't do that. The depression is so bad, and it's to the point where when you're trying electroshock therapy or ECT, when you're trying that and it doesn't work, when you've lost some of your memories because of that, and it still doesn't work, the medications don't work, you can't connect with the light, nothing works. for that person, suicide becomes a very, very valid option because the pain of staying in life, even if they have connection, and this is what happened with my husband that we can talk about further.
Yeah, share us a
But
little bit about that.
he, somebody that is in that situation, literally, um, to go back to the visual of the person on the bottom of the ocean floor with the treasure chest on their entire body. They can't get it off. They can't see the light. They can't feel the hope. They and they've done everything they can. Um, then it's a different kind of suicidality, and it becomes much more of an existential issue. And usually these are people who are much older. They haven't they haven't been in a state where there has been no depression for decades. And that makes a difference. Um, so that's a different type of person that is going to first attempt and maybe complete suicide.
And
And
and there's this feeling in our world we can fix everything. And I know you've spent a lot of time with your dear husband, and I like the way you set this up. I wasn't his therapist, I was his wife, but you certainly had incredible clinical understanding to help you be a better companion to him. But he still died by suicide. And it seems like this paradox where this happened, but everything was done in the right way to help your husband, John. And now you're walking this road that many people are walking, I assume, with, just a very difficult road. Any thoughts on that?
well, maybe I should share some of John's situation. Um, he suffered for 30 years. He actually suffered before, um, when he really started into the severe mode. He served a mission, and he said at the time when he was 19, when he served his mission, he should have never been out on a mission. He was slipping and falling apart at that point, but he was still functional. And he was functional when he got home from his mission. And uh, several years after that is when things started to break down for him. And in 1985, 1986, the one total, um, bipolar, meaning he was not only severely depressed, he also became what we call severely manic. And he had no impulse control, couldn't sleep, wasn't eating correctly, couldn't function. He completely fell apart. He couldn't hold a job. He couldn't deal with anything. He couldn't concentrate. And what happened was he wound up getting onto medications. And they were nasty medications, antipsychotics, because he was completely bipolar. And while these drugs helped him, they did not solve the problem. He had the assistance of some good therapists, some good psychiatrists, and also Desert Industries. And he started to pull himself out of his situation in 1989. He was starting to be able to function, and eventually he taught himself computers, and he was able to find full-time work and be on medication. That helped. But through all of this, the depression never left. And he would have some really, every once in a while, I met him well into this process after about 8 years of him being able to rehabilitate himself. And literally, his therapist didn't know what to do with him. His therapists were amazed at the process he was making. He pulled himself out of where he was due to his own brilliance and common sense. So he did that, but he also never had full and complete days where he could smile. If you look at our wedding pictures, he's not smiling in the wedding pictures, which is really sad. And yet he would have hours or breaks when he might feel normal, when his brain, he used to call it the fog, when the fog would disappear. He could concentrate, he could read, he could think, he could do things. And as time went on and he kept doing what he was doing and finding that we could have stimulating conversations, this helped him a great deal. He was able to pull out of it enough to be able to function. We moved over here to Europe because of his work. And after that contract ended, he decided to find another job here in Europe, and we stayed here. But it was a daily struggle. I knew him for 22 years. I can't tell you of one complete day where he was not depressed. That severe. And he was willing to deal with it until he couldn't. But maybe we can go into that further down the road.
Tell us what you think Heavenly Father said to him when he crossed the veil and returned to him.
Oh my gosh. Well, maybe we better go into this a little further. What I am, and I need to put a big, huge disclaimer on this. What I did was right for myself and right for John. I would never, ever tell somebody I worked with to do this. Absolutely not. In 2011, things got so bad that I wound up in a 2-hour phone conversation with his psychiatrist. At the end of that phone conversation, the psychiatrist said to me, "Gail, you're going to have to learn to let go." And I thought, what in the heck does he mean by that? And over the next 3 years, I thought about it. I prayed about it. I watched him. And at the end of that 3 years, for me, it meant telling him the following. John, if the pain gets so bad that you cannot stay here, and that you know that Heavenly Father is telling you it's okay to go home, you have my permission to go. That was in 2014. He completed the Suicide Act. He only attempted once. So he completed the Suicide Act in August of 2016.
And how old was John at that point?
He was, oh my gosh, 57. So what did Heavenly Father say to him when he got home? He said, you can have a healed brain. I love you. And you made the right decision for you. You don't have to suffer that. Now, that's after 30 years of doing everything he could to not go home. And it was time. He had done everything he could. I have no anger towards him for doing this because I know he did it with prayer and with an understanding that I understood and that I would not hold him here. And we kind of had an arrangement. What I had told him was, if you have to do this, the only thing I ask of you is that you tell me beforehand that you're going to do it and that I not be the one to find you. Well, I'm glad that he didn't tell me beforehand because it could have put me into jeopardy as his wife. I might have been prosecuted for allowing him to do this when I knew it was going to happen. So that wouldn't have been a good thing for me to do. And he knew that. But I didn't find him. He left a note, a very short note, on the dining room table, and the police went to the place where he was. And I never saw his body, which would not have been a good thing. So Heavenly Father told him he was welcome at home, probably put his arms around him, and reminded him that he's loved.
Thank you for being willing to share. You have this unusual perspective, Gail, of your clinical expertise and walking with your dear husband, John, for all these years. I'm imagining listeners right now that have had dear loved ones leave that have been similar to John, where they've spent decades on this road. And I love the hope you're probably giving to them and the healing you're giving to them of sharing your own experience. Now, there's another group that seems to be more spontaneous, and we've talked about that group, so I think we're both careful to not know how this applies to everybody, but I love you sharing your experience and your feelings about John, because I think that is healing for many people. And even though our doctrine is kind of, not our doctrine, but sometimes we're kind of black and white in thinking and linear, I think you bring in an added perspective of the complicated lives that many of our faithful members live. Your husband, that did his best to serve a mission and hang in there, and I think you're teaching us we have love and we support and we leave this at the Savior's feet. I am touched by that you told John that if he needs to leave, that you have my permission. That's something I've never thought about. That would be a very sacred individual experience. I think you're not suggesting that would be the right thing to do in every case and a sort of a one size fits all level advice. But in your situation with decades of walking this together, I think you acted on the inspiration that was needed in this situation. And I honor that, and I honor your feelings about how Heavenly Father received your dear husband. And we certainly understand when people leave earth life because of pancreatic cancer or some of these other illnesses, that has an ending, and suicide is a similar ending in a way that we leave, but it is a difficult road to walk, and I think it's very difficult to empathize with people that are on this road. So I think you're just bringing a very thoughtful conversation to the complexities of this and sharing your own individual journey and inviting our listeners to pick up pieces of your journey that may be helpful to them. There is potentially healing as I think about people that I know have lost a loved one by suicide who have had a similar sort of experience with decades of someone being in an emotionally very difficult spot and suffering mental illness and how difficult that is. Um, so thank you. What would you say to someone who, and you've kind of touched on this, that has lost a loved one who completed or died by suicide?
I don't know. It's what I would say. I do a lot of listening, and um, I I think what I do is just let them know that I would support their process. Everybody's grief process is different. Mine has been different than, you know, um, Jane and Sally and Henry and Albert's process, so to speak. Um, Everybody deals with grief differently. I think what I would probably say most, though, in listening and wanting to respond, is give yourself time, realize that you are a victim here. That was really hard for me to deal with because of the process that I'd gone through in coming to a place where I could let him go. And a very good friend, um, as I was talking to him one night and just sobbing and feeling the pain and like I did not, even though I knew everything I knew and I'd done, I still felt like there was a part of me that felt guilty
Right,
for what had happened.
right,
And he said, Gail, you're a victim here. You are a victim in this. And I think you have to dissect or deconstruct the process in such a way that you can figure out where that victimhood lies. You're not a victim in every area, um, but where are you a victim in this? And what makes it so that you are, and what makes it so that you aren't? Um, John's suicide really changed me for the better. And that would be hard for most people to understand. But I've done a lot of personal growth because of the aftermath of this. And for some people, that might not happen. For me, it has. And so I can listen to others who have been through this and just understand that everybody's different, everybody's grief process is different, and that you have to learn to love yourself in new ways. And that might sound really hokey, but it's really true. This is one of the worst things that can happen to anybody in their life, is to lose somebody through this process. Even when you go in with your eyes wide open and you know it could happen. And with people who are bipolar, it's a very large issue. And about 1/4 of the people who are diagnosed as bipolar will complete suicide. It's a high risk illness. And it's not that they want to, it's just that the pain is so huge that in whatever state of mind they are in, when they commit the act, they cannot logic through that they can either deal with the pain, get some effective pain relief, or even get help.
You said a
And
couple. You said some wonderful things there. I wrote down. I wrote down I wrote down this idea that in some ways, survivors need to look at themselves as victims. I think that's really very thoughtful and maybe a way to help heal, because that's a word where pain comes into your life, or because of the actions of others, that you have a more difficult road to walk, that is, you're not at fault there, even though I would guess most survivors of someone close look back and say, oh, I wish I'd done something different. And that's a very difficult road. But I think casting yourself in some ways as a victim, maybe not as a permanent victim, but as a period of time, I like that. It seems like a way to acknowledge your own pain and how
yeah,
and how difficult this is, and as a way to heal versus having no sense of knowing how to navigate this. I also love this line you said, Gail, that I wrote down: love yourself in new ways. That is beautiful. And I think the Savior would want us to take all of our experiences, that even an incredibly difficult one of losing someone to suicide, and for us to heal is to love ourselves in new ways and look at how our life, like you're talking about your own life, while very painful to lose your husband, you are now in a way to help and minister and lift other people. And so you're loving yourself in new ways and seeing more of your life mission unfold now that you're in a very unique space. So to me, that has hope, which I think are words of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and pointing us forward, and helping us not to feel broken, but better. So those are wonderful things you've said. Very, very helpful. We're kind of getting towards the end, but are there things that are, thinking of the listeners here, that you would like to teach us?
oh, wow.
So that's a pretty open-ended question, Gail.
That is a really open-ended question. Uh, oh, wow. For those who have gone through the process of losing somebody and who are just going through it or even in the process, know that a lot of people don't know what to say to you. They don't know how to behave around you. You might lose some friends over this, and you might make new friends over this. And it's kind of like a sorting process. That's one of the first things I can think to say, is that there are both healthy things and unhealthy things that come out of the process. To those of you who know somebody who has lost someone, to quote one of my blogs, say something, anything.
I love that.
What I any what and what I mean by that is, if you don't know what to say, just even said, I don't know exactly what to say, but I'm feeling really sad and I'm feeling pain for you. And can we, you know, I don't want to put my foot in my mouth, but I love you. I care about you. And that is huge. Take them dinner. The first 2 weeks after John died, my tiny little branch here in the Netherlands um, brought me dinner every night. And for them, it was a real sacrifice. And what I got out of that was interaction. And I found out that people were liking to cook for me. And it took a burden off of me that needed to be lifted. I mean, when you go through this as somebody who is a survivor, who's left by behind by the person that you love, um, you become kind of dysfunctional. You're in a daze. You've just been through a huge trauma. I mean, death itself can be traumatizing. This is like trauma on steroids
Mm-hmm.
because you've got the shock. If you found the body, then you've got to deal with the trauma of seeing that person in whatever state they are in,
Mm-hmm.
and um, that just adds to it. And this, for me, asking John that I not be the one to find him because I didn't know how he would do it. He had, you know, he had let me know he had a method. I never asked what he was going to do. I didn't want to know.
Mm-hmm.
And um, the fact is that every time he did it on our property, and when I walk by where he did it, every once in a while, remember. I still remember what took place in that space. So to talk to people and teach them, um, recognize that the people that you're dealing with are going to be very traumatized, and it might be the day of the week. Um, for me, it's actually when I hear somebody in the neighborhood doing something specific that triggers it, and maybe somewhere down the line that will change. But I'm aware of what it is and why that triggers the memory. Um, it's love your friends, love your families. Don't judge them. This is the hardest thing that they're going through, and they're going to go through hell to heal over this. It isn't something that will just, it's not like normal death. Um, it really isn't. It's absolutely not like normal death. It's death on steroids, trauma on steroids, and you need love on steroids to get through it.
I love that. I'm thinking of this wave of support and love that you received when John left us, the meals and people asking how you are. And then it seems like there's a new norm where that wave of support from friends and family and the war and the branch ward sort of ends. And now, what can people do now? Because I assume that less people are asking about John and how you're doing. Would you like people to continue What are some of the best questions friends, family, church people could ask you at this point? And maybe they're not questions, just what's the best way to minister to you, Gail, at this
I was
point
just
to
going to
be really
say,
broad?
in ministry, it's all about finding out what that person needs. It really is. And I'm going to put a big plug in here. Oh, this is one of my soapboxes. When we talk about ministering in the church now, we are not talking program. We are talking something totally different than a program. That's why there are no reports, no lessons, no contact um, requirements. It's that you do it. I've had a sister that has come, the sister that visits me and ministers. She's come for a number of years. And she might just pick up the phone and say, Gail, how are you? How are you really doing? And she really wants to know. Don't ask unless you want to know. Because an insincere asking of that is not helpful. And I know that Marion, when she asks, because we've actually talked about it, I said, when you ask me about this, how honest do you really want me to be? And she said, I want you to be really honest because I really want to know. So, in ministering to someone, it might be that they need to get out of the house. It might be that they need to have you go out to lunch with them. It might be that they need you to come in and just sit and listen. When in the first 6 months, what I needed more than anything else, but this is me and not someone else, I needed her to come over and a few other people, and I just needed to talk and to process it and to deal with it. And in doing that, I was able to see how I was coping with it. And in my case, I made the decision that I wasn't coping with it very well. And maybe I needed to at 6 months out, find a grief therapist.
Uh-huh.
And so I did. I had several sessions with a grief therapist, and um, in doing that, I was able to more fully understand where I was, and I was able to give her the gory details because that's her job, and she's going to deal with it professionally. And so just being allowed to talk about it was helpful during the first 6 months. And then during the next 6 months, I spent time preparing for the anniversary of his death. And I started to think about what it was I was going to need on that day. And I came to the conclusion that one, I didn't want to be alone. And two, I wanted to have specific people present. And they were very willing to be present on that day because they knew how hard it was on me. So I think it varies for each person, but honestly, in my case, I went from married to single, and for me, having that personal contact on a weekly basis is very, very important. And I think it's true for just friendship and even even couples who lose a child. You might need friends that just come over and say, you just want to talk. We want to bring you dinner. Let's just spend time together and just listen to the stories. Because talking through the stories, talking through the memories, acknowledging where you are in the process is huge. And that's going to help the person get through the trauma. They might not do it all at once. I'm coming up on 2 years in August, and I'm just now being able to spontaneously recall things about John that were very important to me. And I'm allowing myself to come out with them and to really enjoy thinking about it. But it's taken all of this listening and love and support and caring to get to that point. I didn't do it alone. As much as I'm a therapist, as much as I have a lot of knowledge in this area, I had a lot of support. Some that I had to ask for, some that I haven't. But it's taken that much to get to where I am. I've said,
I love so much of that, Gail. I love the idea that you were very proactive in thinking what could help you on John the anniversary date and how you proactively ask people to minister to you. So I think that's a very good paradigm for all of us is sometimes we know best how people can help us, and it's not prideful or it's just part of humanity to ask people, this is how you can help me, and not have them sort of try to figure it out. But then also recognizing that people are proactive at times, but there's a lot of beauty in the things you're sharing here as there's a lot of need to better understand. In closing, what would be just some of your concluding thoughts, Gail?
As I said early on in the podcast, what John and I did together was done because it was the right thing for him. I would never, ever, ever, ever tell anybody to do this. And one, it's not my place. Two, it's something that you need to be very clear on, or somebody needs to be very clear on, and really do a lot of time searching out over a period of years, not just days or weeks or months. So please, people, remember that for starters. Also remember, and one of the reasons why I made sure the links are going to be on with this podcast and in the resources page, if you need help and you can't get to a professional right away, there are hotline numbers. And while they might seem impersonal, better that you call them than that you not talk to somebody. These are people who are really invested in helping you through this process. The other thing is take the time to find good professional help. You don't have to be in pain like this. Most people can find relief. John was an exception to that. Most people can find relief. There are such good medications that work, that are very useful. And John took them. And they did create a lot of relief for him. The last one he was on was amazing. of course, until it wasn't. But for the most part, um, until about the last week of his life, the medications worked. And that's when he started to really know he had to do this. I know that because of the notes that he left. He actually wrote several trials and then left, and then the one that he left. Um, oh gosh.
That's very helpful.
Yeah. Know that unless it's a spontaneous suicide and a spontaneous completion, those people, most people don't leave a note with those. And so you're kind of lost in knowing, well, why did they do it? You may never know, but there is hope in resolving your feelings and coming to an understanding. You are not alone in this. There are support groups, there are therapists, there are people who have survived it. In my case, I'm unique in that I'm a therapist. I've dealt with a husband who was severely depressed for 30 years, and I have the professional knowledge that I have to deal with this. Um, please remember that you are loved and you can work it out. You can resolve this. I would have to say that those are things that are really important. I found a combination of um, deep thinking, meditation, prayer, uh, growth. And when I say study, I mean doing a lot of reading about what others have said about it, their processes. Um, I will be bluntly honest here and say the scriptures didn't help in this case. But knowing what's in those books and having a base of how I dealt, how I um, focus in my own life with my faith has helped. But it's only helped as a part of the puzzle. It's not the complete puzzle, not by any means. Um, so it's a huge mosaic, and it can turn out to be a beautiful thing in the end, but not in the beginning, not by any means. You got to walk through a lot of hell to get to heaven.
That's a pretty good closing line, Gail. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a discussion, obviously, we could go on for hours about, and there's much more you could share with us and teach us. But thank you for taking the time from the Netherlands on this beautiful summer day to share some of your life story, your expertise walking with John, to help all of us understand how to support, help, and love each other. You're a wonderful human. You're so gifted, and I'm honored to call you a friend. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love.